Second, this is a special meeting of the East Bay Charter Township Board. If you will call the meeting to order, and if you'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and we'll do roll call.
Bartlett.
Yes.
Lyle.
Yes.
Cook.
Here.
S. Cortade.
Here.
M. Cortade.
Here.
Walters.
Present.
Friend.
Here. Okay, with that, we have a review for a conflict of interest and approval of the agenda. The agenda you have before you has the 5-year Park and Rec Plan resolution for 2024 to 2028, and also water and sewer topics, being sewer project update and funding resolution, and then annual rate adjustment and rate analysis. So it is a special meeting, but we do have all 7 board members here, so there is the ability to change the agenda. I don't think that anybody's intending to, but does anyone have a conflict? Does there a motion to approve the agenda as a
I'll move to approve the agenda.
presented? Thank you, thank you. Okay. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by no? Okay, we've got an agenda. Public comment, this is the period of time for public comment. So if there's anyone with public comment, we have a couple people here, feel free to just come up to the podium and offer us your perspective, introduce yourself. Okay, seeing, Carol, are you coming up or? I don't want to like pull you with the, but you're welcome to.
Good evening, and thanks for all your work. And I don't have a presentation other than a question. And my question is, in Robert's rules and so forth, is it a concern about quorum of another committee being, another commission being at a meeting?
Oh, okay. Thanks,
Is
thanks,
there a
Carol.
concern?
Yeah.
There may not be, but is there?
And your questions with respect to the Park Commission being here? Yeah, and we don't usually, you've been to enough of these meetings, we don't normally do back and forth, but I understand your question. And no, that's an incidental reason. They would not have any way of knowing if one of them are coming, none of them, or 4 of them, or 7 of them. So they're here to watch the meeting, and so there's no issue with that. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, any other public comment? Okay, with that, we will move to the business before the Township Board. First on the agenda is the 5-year Parks and Rec Plan. You have that in front of you. You have an overview from Sarah Capriva. They did meet last Thursday. They made some adjustments and then approved that Park and Rec Plan. And Sarah went over where it had changed. And then in front of us now is a resolution that is a 5-year Park and Rec Plan support for that. The resolution would be that we would approve and adopt the Parks and Rec Plan. So is there anyone who would like to speak? Zach is here as the chair, or any of the other board members would like to address the board with respect to this. You're welcome to. You don't feel like you have to either. Thanks, Zach. How are you tonight?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good evening, everyone. So last week at the Parks and Rec meeting, we did go over the goals and objectives, and we did change the goals and objectives and numbered them, and I believe we made them more clear for the Parks Plan. We also discussed a lot on low-impact development / low-impact design, and we ultimately came up with the wording of encourage the use of low-impact design in the park plan. So I think we discussed on it more, and hopefully, it's more clear for you guys and better understanding what we're trying to do with the park plan.
Thank you very much. Does any board member have any questions or comments or a motion?
There's just a couple Grammatical.
So those, don't worry, or Sarah had mentioned that it hasn't gone through their final, like, grammatical
Yeah.
review, but those will all be done. The figures and charts need numbers as well, so that just goes through their final, they don't do that before they know what the content is going to be.
I'll just send the ones that came out to me.
Yep, that sounds fine. That sounds fine. Any other questions, comments, or motion?
I'll make a motion to approve it as presented.
What resolution number are we on? Sue? Two? Okay,
Didn't we approve one at the January meeting?
I think there might have,
I thought there was two.
I thought there was two,
It
yeah.
might have been this one.
Oh, that's true, too.
And I don't, Ann, do you have?
I'll look at the minutes.
Thank you.
Hold on a
Appreciate
second.
I was going to try
I
and look
just
them
gotta
up.
get on my, let me see, January 8th, okay, there. Let's see, you had, overnight medical facilities, no, that
And
was the ZA.
this resolution and that Parks and Rec plan, if approved, will be forwarded this week to the DNR to be on file with them
You
for
only
grant
did
purposes.
One, Parks and Rec would have been two, but you didn't pass it.
Thank you.
So Resolution 2024-02.
Correct.
Okay, and we'll do who moved? M. Cortate, and who supported?
I'll support.
Okay,
Did you?
I didn't, but I could.
Okay.
so moved by M. Cortate and supported by Bartlett. And will you do a roll call vote?
Sure, M. Cortade,
Yes.
Bartlett,
Yes.
Walters?
Yes.
S. Cortade?
Yes.
Lyle?
Yeah.
Cook?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes. Okay, very good, thank you. And thank you to the Parks Commissioners for being here and for your work this week, or last week, we really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll get that sent off, and hopefully we'll have some good luck with that, with some projects. All right, with that, we'll move on to the water and sewer topics. We have a sewer project update and funding resolution. And this is with respect to the $11 million project that we've been working on for some time now. And the resolution itself is really just to convey our commitment to the project, nail down some facts with it, excuse me, and use it as an attachment for the legislative request that we'll be filing with Senator Jamusa's office. Acme Township is as well looking at, will be looking at passing a similar one. Right now, I'll let Brian update you on the engineering portion, but the financial portion, just so you remember, $11 million project. We have $2 million from the county ARPA. We have $1 million from the federal funds, although it is committed, it's not, we're waiting for some things to happen at the federal government level until we know more of the facts. But right now, we're considering that we've been able to retain that as $1 million. And then each of the townships have tossed around that $1 million number, but we haven't totally committed to it. So this does allude to that with the $1 million each for both townships in here. So that outlines $5 million and with an ask potentially to the state for $6 million. And I was exchanging emails today and the end of last week with Senator Jamusa's office, and they're going to provide some updated guidance based on what we have and the costs on where we should be at with our ask, potentially being that $6 million or somewhere in the 4 to 6 million, something like that. So we'll continue to have those discussions, but this is pretty broadly written and, just identifying the gap as $6 million. So with that, Brian, do you want to update us on the engineering and what's been going on?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Brian Souza from Wade Trim. So this board I want to say it was November, but I don't remember exactly. I think it was November, authorized us to start the survey, topographic survey for the route or potential route for the force main, which goes from East Bay Lift Station 1, which is at Indian Trail Boulevard, all the way to the city. A lot of it runs in the Tart Trail along Parsons Road. Then once you get west of Garfield, There are two different directions we could go. It actually currently continues in the railroad right-of-way, all the way to the wastewater treatment plant, but we're also looking at an alternative route along Hannah Road. So we have completed the survey, we've completed all the drawings, and that's really a map of what's there, not only on the ground that you can stand there and see, but also below ground. So storage sewer, sanitary sewer, the existing force main, any underground electrical, phone, cable, gas, all of that information that we need to be able to now go through and place a force main, design it, have a contractor review it, and give you bids eventually. We're not to that point yet, but we've got the survey done, which that's a kind of a heavy lift for a project of this size. It's about 3 miles in length. Some of it through a fairly busy section, Hannah Street. We've also met with the city to talk to them about the project, because a short section of this is in the city of Traverse City. Not only to let them know about the project, which they've already known, because we've talked to them before, but also talk to them preliminarily about a potential route change along Hannah instead of following the existing right-of-way. I know they want to potentially replace the water main along Hannah, so this may be a good time for some cost sharing, depending on how the schedules all shake out. But again, those discussions have been preliminary with the city, just to kind of let them know where we're at, the routes that we're looking at taking, and plant a seed, basically, with the city. So where do we go from here? So we've got the topographic survey done. Now the next phase of the project would be to start snaking. How are we going to snake that through all of the existing infrastructure that's there now, so that we're not affecting other things that we don't want to. So that will be the next phase, and I've got to get a proposal to the township for a preliminary design so that we can show that location. And then once we have that location, there's a lot of steps in that process, but at the end point, we have that location, then we start looking at how do we install it. Are we going to install it through directional drill, which is just a boring underground? Are we going to have to install some of it through open cut from the surface? There are some tricky spots where we're close to building foundations with those right-of-ways and the existing force main. Directional drilling close to foundations can be a problem because there's a lot of pressure involved in drilling that line in the ground and the force of the mud. It can also be a problem with the existing infrastructure when you get too close to it. With the age of that existing force main, we don't want to get too close to it. So, but anyway, so that's the next phase. So we're done with the topographic survey and design-ready drawings. The next phase will be preliminary engineering, where we start locating that on the surface, meeting with the city quite a bit, meeting with the township, meeting with others involved, the DPW. So that's coming here as the next phase.
Great. Does anybody have any questions on the engineering aspect of it? I think we've had a lot of discussion about this, so anybody who's watching shouldn't think that you guys aren't interested or aren't questioning it, because we've had a lot of those discussions already. This resolution, getting back to the funding, was written very general, so that in particular, we just identified the gap of $6 million, and then basically showed, and you can see in the second to last whereas clause, showed the layering of the township, the county, and the federal government, and basically the last one, that the townships would value the state partnership and collaboration. And so again, this would go with there's a one-page primer that you file with the representative or the senator, and what I meant is a representative, and so we'll file that with the resolution and see if we can get any traction on that. Any questions? Yep.
Yes. If you end up having to bond out for, what, $5-6 million, what is the annual rate, repay rate?
Yeah, Don might have some good information on that with you, but I know we've talked a little bit with Baker Tilly. I did at a workshop for supervisors with Baker Tilly, and then we have a bond council that we use, so we would work with them. We've also talked real briefly, just very introductory level with Don about, do we do this depending on how much that gap is, and of course, we're just a percentage of that gap because we're in partnership with Acme. Do we do cash payment on it? So we'll see. Do you have any idea on the rates as of late?
So
great question. Do you want, it's kind of a longer explanation than just answering.
Brian, can you give Dawn the
Or
microphone?
maybe pull the one off of there.
Sure, that might, Brian.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. So the beauty of this project is you both, the water and wastewater utility, are financially healthy, currently financially healthy. And let's just concentrate, since your question was mainly on wastewater right now, concentrate on wastewater. And you do have an option to bond for some of that, or you do have some reserves that you would be able to pay some of that down depending on how all the grants, everything falls out. But let's assuming that that gap isn't funded with grants, and I believe the township would be responsible for about 64% of that. It would be up to you guys, honestly, whether you want to bond the difference between that or pull down on reserves. You do have a healthy reserve where that's definitely an option. If you do that on reserves, that would leave it up to you where you want that cash balance to build back up. We could, because of course we could do a combination of a small rate increase to help build those funds back up. So at that point, once we know all hard numbers, we can decide what you want to do. Bond, have a small rate increase, what do you want your cash fund balance to be? But right now, the beauty of it is you have options.
Do you know what some of the percentages that are out there right now?
For if you were to borrow, I don't, I work a lot with DWRF funding that, and I don't know if you'd be able to get CWRF funding.
Yeah, we did not get that.
Okay, you did not get that, because that's, anywhere from 2 to a little over 2%. Probably out on the bond market, I don't know exactly what that would be, but I'm guessing 4.5 at least, right now.
Okay. Well, we can run those projections going either way too, whether we use the cash, what the impact will be for future capital projects, or if we bond it, what that is. So, yep, Mindy?
So the $11 million. I know that prices have gone up approximately 35% in the last 4 years in construction materials projects. Does this have any contingencies already built into it? And then the next part of that question is, when do we actually think this is going to get built? So are we adding the money for the
Yeah, good.
increases? And
Good questions. The first one, if you remember, this was originally projected as a $9 million project. And that was based on numbers. It wasn't just a guess, so it was. Although when we were seeing those costs come in and other projects, crazy, and I'm sure that Brian has a host of examples from other municipalities. Doug White had asked, and I agreed to have them go back and take another analysis at it, and they did, and it was, of course, had more information in it because the 9 million was very preliminary, and also there was time built in there too where they had seen some of those cost increases. So it came back in at $11 million. What was the second part of your question?
when are we thinking we're actually going to build this?
So with that, we're really tied with the Grand Traverse County ARPA funding is the one that's really going to drive us. So that's one of the reasons we came to you and asked to do the surveying last fall. We didn't want to get behind by a whole year or a whole construction cycle. So this preliminary engineering then would start, as soon as we get the contract underway, and then go through, and we would be looking at a 25 and 26 construction so that everything's wrapped up by the end of 2026. Is that correct, Brian?
That's correct, yep.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions on the sewer project, or is there a motion of support for, this would be 2024-3?
I would make a motion to approve the sewer project update and funding resolution 2024-3. Yeah.
Support.
Okay, motion by Tracy, support by Mindy. Ann will do a roll call vote.
Bartlett.
Yes.
Walters.
Yes.
S. Cortade.
Yes.
M. Cortade.
Yes.
Lyle.
Yes.
Cook.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes. Okay, with that, we will come to the annual rate adjustment and the rate analysis. We just have some very general background in here. We've got a sheet on Utility Financial Solutions, the company that Dawn works with. We have just some initial review of the minutes to see when any action was taken on the rates. And then you have the two resolutions and amendments that have to do with the annual increase at 3.5%, one for the sewer and one for the water. And so with that, we've got Dawn Lund here with us. We also have John DeVozo, who's the director of the Department of Public Works, and of course, you all know Brian Souza, our engineer of record. And so I'll turn it over to Dawn and to go over some information for us.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me here tonight. Just a really brief introduction about our firm. We're an international consulting firm. We perform cost of service studies, financial plans, and rate designs for electric, water, wastewater, telecommunication, and gas utilities. We also teach courses, financial planning courses, and cost of service courses across the country. We actually conducted a cost of service study in water and wastewater for the township. We had that discussion, those preliminary results of that discussion back in June of 2021. The utilities are currently financially healthy. Real briefly, from where you were in that position in 2021, where you were projected to be today, you're slightly ahead of where we projected you to be. So both the water and wastewater utilities are currently financially healthy and enjoy a healthy cash balance. You do have the ability to implement you have an ordinance, the ability to implement a 3.5% rate adjustment in each water and wastewater each year annually on January 1. From what I could tell from the meeting minutes, that has not been implemented since about 2015. I don't know how far prior to that. Between like 2012 and 2015, it looks like there was a rate adjustment when I looked at the minutes. And since about 2015, that rate has stayed steady. So that has not been used in several years. The township currently has some financial upward pressure that both water and wastewater will most likely be seeing. That comes in the form of an iron removal treatment plant of about $3 million. This is in the water utility. Also in the water utility, there are a couple wells, one on Hammond Road, and some decisions to be made on wells in Holiday. So that's on the water side. Those projects certainly will put upward pressure on that cash balance. You have a healthy cash balance, but if we draw down those type of improvements without bonding, certainly it could eventually lead to a rate adjustment or use of that automatic COLA clause. We're not recommending that for this year. We would like to see those projects come to reality and some of that cash, deciding how much you want to spend down before you have a rate adjustment in water. In wastewater, we just talked about that $11 million project. Certainly, the township's not responsible for the $11 million. What's left, if you will, wouldn't be grant or ARPA funding. The township's responsible for about 64% of that. You do have the option to spend down some of your funds. You also have a healthy cash balance in wastewater. When those numbers, become hard numbers, we can take a look at, should we bond for the full thing? Should we bond for a part of it? Should we draw down on our reserves? The beauty of that is you have many options there. You do have the reserves to be able to draw down on that. In addition, in the wastewater area, you are going to be seeing significant increases in the treatment costs. That's going to be coming through the way of infrastructure upgrades through your treatment rate. That has not officially hit yet. It was supposed to hit in this year, and it hasn't officially hit yet, but my understanding is that is coming. So the wastewater department will have a significant capital improvement to fund, and they'll also have rather significant increases in the treatment cost. So there's some upward pressure there. Again, the beauty of it is right now, without those things happening, you have a healthy cash balance. And I wouldn't recommend a rate adjustment until we see some of those things happening. But most likely, from what I can see, the COLA adjustment, or that 3.5%, will most likely should be implemented in water next year, in that next January 2025 cycle. Water is iffy, if you will, if it really needs that. But we want to monitor that cash balance very closely. Right now, unfortunately, in Michigan, water and wastewater utilities are currently kind of being penalized for having cash on hand. You know, for years, it's a positive thing to have cash, to keep the system healthy. But there is a law firm out there really watching water and wastewater and utility cash balances. We want to be sensitive to that. You're in a fortunate position, you've kept the utility healthy, and now that you do have some significant projects, you can lean on those reserves without having significant increases. You've enjoyed not having increases for years now, but certainly we can't really do that forever, especially with these projects coming up and this increase in costs. You don't need to do, I'm not recommending you do anything today, but just a reminder that COLA adjustment is out there, and most likely it will need to be used in wastewater next year and possibly water eventually. So if that COLA adjustment were to be used, currently right now in sewer, customer pays $26.42 per REU. If that 3.5% rate adjustment were added, it would be about 90 cents. So 90 cents to the average residential customer. In water, they pay $23.36 for the first 6 units, basically, cubic feet. And if a 3.5% rate adjustment were to be placed there, it would be 80 cents for the average residential customer. Again, we're not recommending that for this year. I really would like to see that cash balance being leaned on a little bit for the projects that you have coming up. But just, I think we wanted you to be aware you do have that ordinance, and probably at some time it would be wise to use it.
Before you get to the second part of the presentation, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have Dawn back in front of you, all of you, is because we haven't implemented that in a while. And I wanted to give some advance notice. And now is you know, while everybody struggles with inflation, at the same time, I was just on a phone call today with Treasury, with that local government advisory team had their meeting, and Treasury was talking about how a year ago from now, they had expected a recession to be in right now, and they don't. They just updated their financials with the state. They haven't witnessed that recession. Their prediction, or their estimate, is that they're looking at continuing positive economic growth, maybe slowing, but not, they don't see it going quite into a recession in the near future. So it looks to be a relatively stable time to do a modest increase like that, and then tying that in really nicely this year with doing our capital improvement plan through Beckett and Rader, and then getting those projects from Brian into that queue, and then next year doing the rate adjustment in January.
Before I move on, do you guys have any questions on anything I've covered so far?
I got a question more, I think, toward the township, but my belief is we have a resolution that was passed that we can raise those utilities 3.5% a year. And that's been for, even though we didn't use it, it's still there and usable as a tool.
Well, there was a motion in 2020 to retain the current water and sewer rates until an analysis was complete.
Right.
And so,
But what I'm saying is, this tool to raise the 3.5, is the resolution's on the books.
Yeah.
You can do it. I mean, you can bring it to
Yep.
township board. We don't have to recreate anything.
yep,
And,
yep.
Yeah.
okay, so we're not looking at recreating something. We're looking.
No, as a matter of fact, Don and I looked at it and we were like, do we even need to take this to the board, or do we take it to the board? And I was like, you know, I really feel like we should, since we had the conversation about a year and a half ago. And I wanted to know I wanted you guys to know where we were at with those enterprise funds.
Yeah, I think it's more just a reminder, and since you hadn't used it in years, just a reminder that it's gonna be possible it's gonna be time to lean on it soon.
I know we're getting older and we get forgetful when we get older, but I remember that part of it.
And it's a good ordinance to have. It's actually very healthy. Just as a little aside, we see a lot of this in the power industry, the electric industry, something called the PCA. When power costs change, there's an automatic pass-through to customers. You don't see it a whole lot in water and wastewater, so I was very pleased you have that ordinance, because it makes it for a much smoother transition. So do you have any more questions before I move on real briefly? I just have a couple more slides. I'll make it brief. Okay. So, whoops, real quickly, I just want to review actual rate structures. First of all, there's many acceptable rate structures, like how do we charge our customers? There's a flat fee where we charge everybody, the same price. There's a fee based on REU, or residential equivalent unit, where we look at tables and we base everything on one residential customer. Like for example, I'm just throwing out an example. I have a residential customer and I have a car wash. A car wash might be equivalent of 10 residential customers. So a car wash would have a 10 REU, home would have a 1 REU. That's just an example. We see all those rate structures across the country, and we see them here in Michigan, all right? There's pros and cons to every rate structure, and I want to talk a little bit about that. The most common rate structure, or the most, I don't even want to say industry acceptable, but industry acceptable, where we'll see it in the M1 manual, the AWWA M1 manual, is a progressive charge by meter size, where if we have a 5/8 inch meter, we charge a monthly customer charge, and then we charge for all commodity used. Then we might charge a different charge for 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and so forth. But there's pros and cons to each type of rate structure, and so that's why you see different rate structures across the country. A flat charge is easy to administer. We know what we're going to charge everybody. But we can have some controversial discussions there about low users. When we're charging everybody the same rate and somebody's only using 3 CCUs a month and somebody's using 15 CCUs a month, how is that fair and equitable? The REU is easier to administer from the purpose of we have one for a residential customer, and then we look at a table. They're well-defined engineering tables to determine what type of entity we're dealing with. Are we dealing with a restaurant? Are we dealing with a car wash? And so forth. And they might be assigned a higher REU rate. The cons of that are sometimes it can be controversial. The assignment can be controversial. And I'm going to show you an example in the next slide. Sometimes those can get challenged. They have been challenged in Michigan. Assignments, but again, there's no perfect rate structure. So any rate structure can be challenged. The progressive by meter size is typically the most industry standard and thought to be the most fair and equitable way to charge rates. But again, not every system is sophisticated to have the type of billing, metering, reading, those types of things to have that kind of rate structure. The township actually has a little bit of a blend. In water, you charge a fixed rate by REU. You're currently charging $23.36 in water per REU. And after 600 CCUs, or 6 units, if you want to refer to it as that, which is about the average residential user, you charge $2.65 per unit after that. In wastewater, you charge $26.42 per REU. So you have a little bit of a blend in water, charging a fixed rate and charging by usage after a certain commodity. So when I did this study, I was asked, well, should we consider moving to charging by meter size, moving from the current REU system by meter size? Why would we even consider that? Well, this is just one table. I want to emphasize this is not township data. I didn't use township data on purpose, but you will see something similar to this, maybe not as dramatic. You do have this in your data. This is an example of a 2-inch meter, and this is actually a real client, a 2-inch meter, the restriction of capacity for usage is the meter. Meaning, if everybody in the room has a 2-inch meter, we have all the same potential to put capacity on the system. The restriction is the meter. If I have a 5/8 inch meter, I have a smaller ability to run water through that. That restricts my capacity. If I have a 2-inch meter, I can run more water through that. So everybody in this example, the 2-inch meter has the same capacity potential on the system. In this example, you can see that the actual water usage through that first 2-inch meter was 36,000 gallons. They were assigned a 50 REU. When you look at the very bottom of this chart, the same 2-inch meter, the water usage was 276,000 gallons, and they were assigned a 25 REU. This is just a dramatic example of how the REU table can get challenged, okay? The first one happens to be a school. Again, I'm going to emphasize this is not East Bay's data. This is not a school in East Bay, but this was challenged. Because most likely what happened was seats were counted, right? Desks were counted or square footage. And so they were assigned a very high REU, but very low usage. So these are the questions that can come up with an REU system. It doesn't make a REU system bad or wrong. We do see it, again, across the country, and there are pros and cons to every single rate design or every single rate structure you go to. But this is why this discussion even came up. Are we charging the most fair and equitable method and structure that we can charge? So that's just an example. Before I move on to that, because I think we're going to end with connection fee discussion, do you guys have any questions on the REU system? I was just asked tonight to briefly talk about the differences, the pros and cons, as that was, way back when we first did the study, that was a question that came to light, was should we move to the meter system? Does anybody have any questions on that?
I guess when we talk REUs, that's your benefits that you're getting when you hook up to the water, correct?
That's the next discussion we're going to have. Great
Oh,
comment.
I'll wait till
Great
that, I'll wait till that discussion then.
Okay, so let's briefly review that, okay? When you hook up to a system, you have something called, you call it here a benefit charge, meaning you pay to hook up to the system. That's a flat charge you pay per REU. It's a one-time charge. You pay that and you're done. Now that you're hooked up to the system, you're going to use water and you're going to need wastewater treated. So the second part of this is usage charging, where you get charged a monthly customer service charge that recoups things like the fixed cost of the meter, customer service sitting there, a portion of the distribution system, those things that do not change with usage. The commodity rate that you have is based on, because people use water, if they use more than 6 units, they're going to pay more than that fixed fee. Not all systems include usage in their minimum. You guys do include usage in your minimum. In the perfect world, again, there's no perfect rate design. We wouldn't include usage. We would charge our fixed fee as we need to, our fixed cost recovery as we need to, and all units would be charged for what they use. So, but again, all systems have a way to improve their rates. It doesn't mean they're charging them incorrectly. It's just, I was asked to kind of look at this and see. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is that connection fee. When somebody wants to connect up to the system, they have to pay that one-time fee. We're going to talk about that next. Great question or comment. Any other questions on the usage fees?
I'm just trying to imagine a scenario like this table in the township. Would it be fair to say that maybe a one-bedroom studio apartment would be assigned 1 REU if it was metered separately, and then a single-family home would be assigned 1 REU, but might have 5 or 6 people and a sprinkler system that's running wide open all summer long. So it might skew these numbers kind of similar to what you've got on this table, right?
Yeah.
But remember, that sprinkler system's going to bump them over the 600 cubic feet, and they're going to get charged that 265 per unit
Okay.
above that.
Okay.
So they're not getting a full sprinkler system and the household usage for the 2336.
Okay.
I want to throw this out there too. You guys have low rates, very, very low rates. So the US EPA standard for water per month is almost $100 per month. And your typical residential customer pays, probably most likely falls within that threshold without sprinkling of the 6 units of 2336. So they pay a quarter of what is considered affordable according to the US EPA. So I just want to throw that out there because sometimes numbers sound scary, you know, what we're paying monthly, but you do enjoy low water and sewer rates.
And that's
Just to-
after we did major bumps back in, I don't know, 2008, 10. We did some major increases.
Okay, just to comment on that. We do have lower rates, but we've been able, by the looks of the balance sheet, we've very healthy financially on water and sewer. So what we've been doing does work. When we start talking water and sewer, I've got a place in town, I had several of them. And I'll tell you, you want to get scared, look at their water and sewer bill every month. Because the sewer is based on the water use. So if you're out watering the grass or doing something, your sewer rate's going up. So, you know, if that's what you're gonna bring up, I'm just gonna tell you ahead of time that, you know, I've been down that road and I'm still going down the road.
So I wasn't going to talk about that tonight, but that is a good concept, because if you were to move to the meter charge, a customer charge by meter charge, and then charging for all usage, that you would typically follow that pattern in sewer too. And so the question becomes, in sewer, would we charge for all water that goes down? Sewer doesn't have a meter, right? You use the water meter for the sewer read, so to speak. Do we use the water read as the sewer usage, or do we do a winter-based average in the summer? Knowing, well, okay, I'm just throwing out examples, okay? The average user uses 5 CCUs in December and January, let's say, and so we're gonna charge, maybe cap it at 7 CCUs in July and August for sewer. So there's stuff called the winter-based average, where you can move to that instead of charging for all water that goes down the system. That's kind of an aside, but since you brought that up, great comment.
Just a couple questions I had here on the REU system. It mentions the trend from REU to meter size, or is it meter size to REU? When did that trend happen? How long has that been going on? Is that an AWWA that's been in standard for a long time?
So great question. REU and charge by meter size has kind of always been around, quote unquote, if you'll look at it that way. The reason utilities, especially in Michigan, are questioning should they move to progressive by meter size is quite frankly because of what's happening in Michigan with rate challenges. It's unfortunate. Water and sewer utilities are in particular getting hit with rate challenges, and that table that I showed you, this happens to be a rate challenge table. And so the discussions have come out more education on REU, what's the pros and cons, more education on progressive by meter size. So I can't say there's some huge trend to do this, but we're definitely seeing more questions, more utilities making sure they're charging fair and equitably, especially in Michigan, the Bolt versus City of Lansing ruling. You know, we want to make sure we're meeting the Headley Amendment rules, and not to say that the REU system isn't, but unfortunately, in my opinion, I think the Headley Amendment is abused when we have greedy attorneys, quite frankly, trying to apply that to utilities that are most likely just trying to do the best they can, setting their rates and keeping the utilities cash flowing. And so those things in Michigan have made utilities more aware and question, are we charging fair and equitable rates?
Another question on the REUs. There's a guideline, right, on everything's brought down to one REU, and then other types of uses are some multiple of REUs. How do you establish that guideline? And assuming like that was put in place many years ago, does that need to be adjusted or revised? And I noticed that in the minutes, it looked like back in 2011, maybe the DPW did an analysis on the REUs. Because it had said, Brian and Souza, the bill, let's see, it's that last motion there, and it says that the DPW had asked the townships to take a look at the chart and approve any changes. So there must have been some change of REUs there.
Well, certainly I can let John comment if he wants to, but in general, those REU tables aren't updated often, okay? I mean, in general, maybe every 10 to 20 years. I mean, and it depends on the utilities, the area, the associations that are using those tables. So it's not like those are updated often. In general, they're well-studied tables. The intention of those are good. But as anything, you're always going to, find weaknesses within those tables, like this example I'm showing you. And that doesn't mean necessarily the table needs to be updated. It's maybe the methodology behind the table that's assigning that REU should be better, well thought out.
Okay.
When I'm looking at your meter chart there, you got 2-inch meters. Does anybody in residential have a 2-inch meter?
No, that's typically commercial and industrial. But
Okay.
this is an example of showing you that everybody on this table has the same capacity, and you can see the wide variety of the REU assignment doesn't relate to necessarily the water usage. You can see the lowest REU on this table has the highest usage.
Yeah.
And potentially then the highest bill, if their bill is based off of REUs.
If their bill is based off REUs, they have the lowest bill. They have the lowest bill.
No, the 50 has the highest.
50 has the highest bill, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that.
Yeah.
The 50 has the highest bill with the lowest usage. The highest user has the lowest bill.
Yeah.
And that's where the challenges come in. Is this a handful of customers on each system? Yes, probably.
Is this like a big condominium complex or something, a housing complex
That's
at
a school. That top one is a school.
school? Well, they're closed, 3 months out of the year?
Right.
Is that their average usage
This is their yearly usage,
in cubic feet?
1,000 gallons. Well,
Oh,
1,000 gallons.
okay.
1,000 gallons.
And then real quick, John, a question here about actually the plumbing, the size of the pipe going into the single-family residence. Is that usually 5/8 inch, 1 inch?
Well, from the main to the house is usually 1 inch.
Okay,
From there, they may have smaller, dictated by the plumbing code. But I do want to, as far as meters, the REU and benefit are equivalent the way you use it. It's the same. So one benefit is one REU, and it means one single-family home. On average, 200 gallons per day. Okay? I've seen residences with 5/8 meters, 3/4 meters, 1 inch meter, and 1.5 inch meter. So you have a range of 4 meters just in a single-family home. It depends on how, what their appliances are, whether they have irrigation, sometimes they have a pool, depending on what their use is on the other side. Typically, it's a 1 inch line with a 5/8 meter is a house. Do you define apartments as residential? Because some of those have 2 inch lines that go in, but it feeds all 10 or 12 units. We have some apartments that are metered individually, so you have a 2 inch line that breaks off into 12 units, and each one has a 5/8 meter. Some have 1 inch meters. It all depends. When they connect, it's really up to their plumber to dictate, based on what they designed that room or that house or that unit to use water, what size to use. And unless it's something
like out of the ordinary, we wouldn't reject it. I would reject a 2-inch on a house that doesn't have irrigation, like that's just too big. You don't need that, we don't want that connected to the system. But for the most part, a house is 1 inch. I really like to go to 1-inch meters, but we have a lot of 5/8 out there. So right now, 5/8 is the typical residential meter. The typical commercial office building is 1 inch. And when you get beyond typical office, like restaurants, they're 1.5, 2 inch. Car washes are 2 inch. Meyer is like 4 inch, 6 inch in spots. We also have fire lines. The mall, I think it's 10 inch. So there's 1 feet to the mall that serves the majority of the buildings. Some of them, like Dunham's, has its own feed, and whatever is there before Dunham's also had its own feed. So the usage on the other end of a meter varies immensely. And there's no one house uses exactly the same as another house. But I have reviewed single-family homes and apartments.
Okay, okay.
Probably in the 11s, somebody went through another township, probably looked at apartments. We've looked at apartments, office buildings.
That 2011 study we did, and it was for the DPW, this is before you come on board. And the question was, because their standard volume of water use for a single, for 1 hour.
Yeah.
The reason the study was done in 2011 is because prior to that, the DPW assumed that 1 REU was about 300 gallons a day per REU. And we, through discussion, we all felt that was way too high. So the study then took, 1,000 residences in between several townships in the area, because you'll get regional differences across the United States. And we analyzed their winter use of water, and we determined, so we're just looking at single-family homes, how much water did they use per month in the wintertime. So we took irrigation out of that equation and boiled it down to figure out how much was the average water use per day per REU. So that's what that study did, and it determined, actually it was around 150, but when we start talking sewer and infiltration and some other factors, 200 gallons per REU per day was the one. So that's what that study did in 2011.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I have just a comment to that. It's not my understanding that any of the townships have adopted a gallons per day per REU. So what we have is an REU is 1 single-family home, period. There's no gallons associated with it. As soon as you start assigning gallons to it, anybody that isn't one is going to challenge you, and you're going to have to meter their use, and you're going to have to change their REUs, because it is not going to come out exactly as what your table is. So for instance, any restaurant is based on seating. So you put 10 seats in, you have 12 and a half benefits. If you add a seat, we add another negative benefit. That's just how it works. So, and they all use different volumes of water. So you're going to have restaurants with all different, each one's going to be unique. Nothing's going to be standard. There's going to be no review of new buildings. That also becomes an issue when you have sewer only and you don't have water to meter. You're going to have to fall back on a table. So again, my recommendation is that if you're going to stick with the REUs, you maintain the table. We can maintain what a single-family home average use is and compare that with the table and recommend modifications from time to time. I would not recommend you saying 1 REU is this number of gallons, because what that doesn't take into consideration is infiltration, so there's and the reason why the DPW is using 300 back is because that's what the EGLE or DEQ was requiring us to use, and it's the design use on a home. So you have, and what that does is build in growth. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's what we're held to on our end for design. We're going through that right now with Acme, because Eagle's making us use 300 gallons. We're metering it, and it's coming out half that, and they won't let us change the number of REUs on our system or what we have available. So we still have to use the 300 gallons. But that's on the design end of things. We're talking about a monthly billing. I think as long as we have a standard by which everything is compared to, and we use that uniformly, especially across classes, then I think from our end, it's the best that we can do unless we switch to per gallon for everybody.
Okay, Mindy?
Are there any partial REUs?
There are in excess of one. So one is your minimum. A restaurant, or let's say a grocery store is based on square foot. So if it's 2.5 REUs or benefits per 1,000 square feet, you know, if it's a 2,800 square foot, you're gonna have whatever.
So the minimum being 1.
The minimum's 1. So like apartment buildings, if you have 8 units, well, I'll have to use Garfield as an example. A 12-unit building comes in, they want to do a 2-inch lead, so it has a master meter, so I have a 2-inch meter. That requires a management company to run that and pay that bill. I can't bill each individual unit. If you want me to bill each individual unit, each one gets a meter. Each one cannot be a half. So each one's going to be billed 1, but they were only charged a half of benefit to connect. Does that make sense?
Any other questions for Dawn or anyone, John or Brian, before we move on?
Just one. I don't need a full explanation, but just to understand the comment about where our rates stand relative to maybe the EPA national standard. You said $100 a month. What is best practice when it comes to building these rate structures? Is it more to cover your costs, your fixed costs, your maintenance costs, your production and treatment costs, and then build a percentage as a buffer in, or are you trying to more target a specific rate? Is it, I'm assuming it's more based off of what your input costs are, right?
So super great question. So what we try to define is called revenue requirements. What we try to define is what's called revenue requirements. And what does that consist of? That consists of all of your treatment costs, all of your salaries, wages. Of course, we like to look at things on a utility basis, so we look at depreciation. And we do look at a small rate of return for a municipal utility. It's a break-even rate of return to recoup interest expense and the inflationary increase on the assets you have invested in the system. So it's a very small rate of return that's considered break-even. So we don't try to target a certain rate or threshold of a rate or stay, 25% of what we consider affordable. It's by each specific utility defining their revenue requirements and what they really need to charge in order to keep their system healthy.
Okay.
Good question.
One last question. When you talked about 1 REU for single-family home, if they got into where it's looked at with square foot or bedrooms in a home, because you got from one extreme to the other in square footage of homes anymore. It used to always be, 1,200, 1,400 square foot. Now you got some mammoth homes and you got some tiny homes. And
So good question. But let's think about what, and you probably have a better answer than I do, but let's think about what drives water treatment, and that's bathrooms, right? So that therein lies some of, in my opinion, and I'm not an engineer, some of the problems you can run into, basing things on number of seats in a restaurant, basing things on square footage. Because what really we're trying to recoup is water costs, and how do we use water, our bathrooms or our kitchen sinks or whatever they are. And so you probably have a better explanation for that, but size of home doesn't matter as much as bathrooms or ability to use water in the home. Do you want to add to that?
To answer your question, that's been a discussion for a long time. My neighbor has 10 people living in his house, and it's just me and my wife in our house, but we pay the same amount if we do it by REU. But that's always been discussed, it's brought up often, but 1 REU is 1 residential equivalent unit, whether it's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath home or a 10-bedroom, 5-bath home. It's just the nature of that beast, and that's where you really see the difference in, in the equity of billing just by REU. Now, if you were to bill by meter size and consumption, then you could incorporate all the additional people living in that house, or a bigger house that gets used a lot more. I mean, but even a 10-bedroom house might only have 2 people living in it, use the same amount of water. So but again, that's really where the equity comes in billing by meter size and consumption versus just doing an REU, blanket REU.
So you can reach to the concern that Glenn has through the meter size because you're actually being billed on what's used versus one house being indiscriminately sized differently from another, but being assigned the same number.
Correct.
But
Further on that though, that large home probably still has a 1-inch lead. It still has a 4-inch sewer line coming out that ties in to an 8-inch main. And the capacity is equivalent. The problem is, not the problem, but the issue is that small house that has, just grandma living in it is paying the minimum. Because we're not gonna go through and count people. Because I'm not running out asking who got born today and adding on to your bill every time someone gets born or someone moves away. So I mean, that's a complicated way to look at things, and here's what I found in my experience. Your customers are going to come to you with every angle possible, and if you sit down and start setting rates based on every angle you cannot keep up, and nobody's going to be happy, because every day you're going to be changing your rates, and you can't have that. So you need consistency. That consistency is your minimum rate assigned to a house. So if you base it on lead size or meter size, same principle, then everybody has that same capacity whether you use it or not. If you need more, you got to upsize, your bill goes up. And then you use more, we charge you per gallon that you use, your bill goes up. The way that you lower your bills is you use less. In that situation with the school, for instance, in looking at that data, I think I might recommend that they not have a 2-inch lead. I would get a smaller lead into that building. So you don't have a 2-inch conduit from a building that's not using it out in your system. And now if you're doing capacity studies, you can help lower the capacity. It might even end up lowering your future capital costs on your system.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused here, I think, but we're talking REUs. You pay the REUs when you tie into the water. Well, then you pay the rate based on usage, not REUs, in a residential setting, right?
Well, for water in this township, you pay a flat fee, okay?
Exactly.
So for instance, your house pays 23, 30, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
36 per month, and the big industry that's churning out millions of gallons a day also pays 23.36 per day.
Correct.
Okay? That bill's the same for every customer. Then you add in the 265 per
Right.
fee.
Exactly, so it just gets a little confusing talking REUs, regardless, unless you're charging on a meter size. The way we're charging in this township, and I guess we have since day one, is the flat rate, and then anything over and above. I believe a lot of different units charge that way. I think the city charges that way. You got your flat rate, and then the other townships, I think, charge that way. So
So in this area, I agree with you. Across Michigan in general, the most common way to charge is progressive by meter size plus all usage used. Again, we see all different types of rate structures in Michigan. They're all industry acceptable as long as they're, developed fairly. So in this area though, doing the studies for a lot of utilities in this area, you're correct. But that doesn't mean that's widespread in Michigan.
Okay, when you charge by meter size, that would be like a flat rate, your meter size, and then you charge by usage, correct?
Yes, for all utilities.
Okay, and maybe somebody's done this, but the first thing I think about, if you took a couple or a handful of residents and pull their bill, would that bill be higher if we went through and did it that way than the way they're paying now?
Super great question. So right now, remember, you include 100 cubic feet in your bill. So somebody that uses only 3 units, let's say, and you went to meter size, their bill would most likely go down. Okay? Because I'm gonna have a fixed charge by meter size. Let's just say a 5/8 inch meter. And in general, a 5/8 inch meter, all systems are different, but let's call it $15 a month.
Okay.
All right? And then they use 3 units. Even if you just take, 3 units times probably your commodity rate of $2 a month that would go down to, I mean, it depends, the numbers have to work out, their bill would most likely go down. Now, let's pretend you go to charging for all usages. And remember, when we charge for everything, I'm not including 6 anymore. So right off the bat, that person's gonna lose $2.65 times 6 units. All right? So their bill's gonna go way up. Now, does that mean that's gonna happen in the first rate design? That's the art part of all of this. You guys would probably pay me more to do a rate design, moving to that system, than you did the whole study. I'm just telling you, that's how much analysis goes into this. Before you guys make any decisions, every single customer would be analyzed, and you would know every single customer, how they're affected under the old system and under the new system. So, you would
sorry.
have some that pay more and some that pay less.
Let me illustrate your commodity rate with your allowance. Your allowance is $2.65 per 100 cubic feet. You get 6 of those. At $2.65, that's $15.90 of the $23.36. In essence, you are charging every customer on your system $7.46 per month, flat fee. Then you add on the 6 units that you give them, and then anything above that is charged $2.65. The reason why there may be an increase to when we move is because this $7.46 can't sustain itself in the new rate structure. It has to be higher than that, which means we need some of those units that aren't using the 6 is going to absorb that difference, and probably their bill will stay the same. At least when we look at it, we try to make it as many people, single-family homes, not increase the bill, but we can't avoid some of them. It's going to happen. And then anything greater, like those 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, they're also only paying $7.46. Their rates are going up, period, because their bill is going to be multiplied by 10.
So we're getting a little bit into the weeds. Do we want to get back and let you finish what you had here?
So I guess, let's just wrap that meter discussion up by saying, if, you want to consider that there's more, you would just say, yes, I would start designing that rate, we would come back to you, and you would see how everybody's affected by that. There's pros and cons to everything. The connection fees, you charge, now we're going back to that connection fee you're talking about. When somebody wants to use water or wastewater, they have to pay, it's called a benefit charge. You charge that one-time fee. And that's based on RU. Typically, if you move to meter size for your regular usage, you're going to move to meter size for connection fees too. You typically charge the same type of structure. So right now, you're charging the connection charge by RU, and I think the question tonight is, I think you've had questions on apartments, if I'm correct. What should we have discussions around that? Typically, 1 RU is 1 RU for a residential customer. I don't know, Beth, did you want to introduce
Yeah,
that,
I
or
think-
do you have any questions on that?
Well, I think what we were trying to get at this evening is there an interest in the township in looking at going to meter size? Do we want to have you do that analysis to go to meter size? Or are we strictly saying, nope, we want to stay with REUs? So there's things that we need to do after each of those decisions. If we're going to a meter size, then Dawn starts with the analysis. If we're going to stay with REUs, then I think that we need to potentially look at some of the REU assignments on the tables, because I think that studies will show that maybe the amounts aren't quite right. And we can isolate what those are, but that would be a decision if we were only staying with the REUs. So we really kind of need to know which path we want to take a look at going down. Mindy?
So aren't the RUs for water only used for the connection fee? They're not used for the water usage because we're all getting a flat fee and then our water usage. So it's not like this, the scenario with the school, that if you're charged per RU for water usage and you had 50 units, you would be extreme versus what you're actually using. We're actually charging for usage.
Well, but you still have that amount that they were saying is above that. Do you want to handle that?
So do they charge RUs for wastewater, or is it just a flat 23?
So
26?
wastewater,
Wastewater's RU.
wastewater's billed per benefit per month.
Right.
Water is a flat fee per month, but both benefit charges are based on REUs/benefits. So that school at 50 is probably a pretty accurate accounting of what a benefit count is on a school.
And that would be their wastewater.
And water. And
Analysis,
so,
yeah.
so for both of these, we would have charged them 50 benefits to connect. But then every month, you start reading the meter, it's not coming out to 50 equivalent homes, it's coming out to less than that. It's coming out to a third of that. Okay? That's the argument, is that your benefit table calculation does not necessarily correlate directly to actual water.
But in East Bay Township, their water usage, even though they have 50 REUs, is only the actual water usage. It's the sewer bill that is on the REUs, correct?
Correct, but you did charge them 50 benefits.
Right.
Yep.
Right, but on the monthly bill.
Right, but think of it, so here's the implications on that. Let's say they
I
come
got
in and
it.
they complain about their sewer bill at 50. Then they're gonna say, well, if 50 isn't right, then you shouldn't have charged me 50 benefits on my water or my sewer. Now the capital costs, and they're arguing that you overcharged them. On a monthly fee, they're only complaining about this.
Sewer.
And when you do a meter size, does your ready-to-serve fee, basically just to have the tap there on a monthly basis, that varies by meter size as well, correct?
Correct, it's progressive. So I'm just throwing out examples. A 5/8 inch meter would be $15. A 3/4 inch meter would be $19. You know, a 1 inch meter is going to be $25, and so forth.
So then you're not having companies that are, have a much bigger system with that 20-some base rate, correct?
Right, so like a 4-inch meter, for example, would have a $600 meter charge per month. I'm just throwing out numbers, examples.
Because it gets to the cost of the system.
And the cost of the infrastructure, a 4-inch meter costs much more than a 5/8 inch meter, just the meter alone. And so we analyze that and determine what that customer charge should be.
Okay, did Matt?
Yeah, I'm sitting here racking my brain because we went over this, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago?
It's about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, a year and a half ago. And we were all asked to give questions, and I know I submitted at least 10 questions, never got an answer because things moved on differently. So I'm trying to just figure out what my questions were back then, but,
I've got them right here.
yeah.
So you had some legal questions, and those had more to do with Bolt and City of Lansing. But they weren't really specific so much as to the application of that law to here. It was more like, what did the dissenting opinion say and so forth. So those would be more just general legal things, not as specific to here. And then you went on to the REU meter size. And those are some of the questions I was pulling out earlier. So like the trend from REU to meter size or meter size to REU, and how long has that been happening? How do we currently determine an REU? And the gentleman here covered that. And if it's, you mentioned if it's a single home is 1 REU, then is a duplex 2 and a quadplex 4, which is, yes, that is the case. And who makes that determination criteria? Well, we've heard it was Eagle and then changed by their own analysis. So you mentioned.
The DPW makes that determination based on your chart in your ordinance.
And then you have in here about the meter size for single-family homes. Do they have 5/8 or 3/4, 1 inch? And they talked about that. Most of them have 5/8, 3/4, an inch. And does the internal plumbing size change with that? And I think what I heard here is no. Typically, I mean, that's the typical plumbing that they would put in a home, and then they just hook up those 3 different sizes too. And then you have a mention in here about a $2,500 hookup fee, but I'm not sure where that was because I didn't remember that number. And then it asked about a breakdown, which we wouldn't really do until we decided if we wanted to look at going down that meter rate. Then we would really look to see the impact. And we wouldn't want to put this board in the position, I don't think, of saying, here's the business, ABC, we'll just say this business because it's not here, ABC Appliances, their bill is going to go up by this much. And, you know,
Acme Widget Works.
Acme Widget Works is going to go down by this much. We're not going to get involved to that level. They're going to know that because they're figuring out what the rate structure should be. They're knowing, you know, what's going on a very detailed level at the DPW. But what we'll want to know and what we'll find out from them analyzing the meter size is, well, we're going to have 10 to 20% increase in costs, we're going to have so many decrease, we're going to have X percentage stay right about the same within 5%, 10% of their current bill. That's the type of granular level that I would think that we would want to take a look at. We wouldn't want to pick or choose a methodology based on a specific business. That would. Exactly. And that was one of the things that was like, you know, could we see the data for that? And that was one reason we just kind of put that on ice a little bit, because we didn't want to put anyone in the position of having the data with the businesses and so forth. And then, let's see, then you had another set of questions that said, well, again, it was about the $2,500, I'm not sure, but it does mention the $3,900 benefit fee, which is right, that's what we have for water and for sewer. What is the actual cost per cubic foot? And I think you kind of went over that. The actual number of benefits sold in the past 10 years, DPW can definitely, I mean, Dawn's been looking at all of this information. As a matter of fact, when we went through the ARPA process, and we looked at the number of REUs that were approved, we also had the DPW go back and look at how many had been signed up. So that's data.
Totals, not total benefits, but this year you had about $100,000 in connection fees. Last year you had about $500, the year before you had about $350, and the year before you had about $250. So divide those numbers by 3,900, and then you've got the number.
And we started financing probably heavy 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are financing.
Yeah.
You're spreading it out over 10 years, so
Yep.
we've got 120 payments,
So we have
say
the-
it was 20-something thousand to connect, that's spread out over 120 payments.
Yep. We go back to, you had like how many current users will be significantly negatively affected. So if we chose to go down a meter rate, that's an estimate we would get, like what percentage of the population, or what percentage of the customers, rather, I should say, would be negatively impacted, positively impacted. If we are going to upset the apple cart, why not go all in and charge for the actual water used? After all, it would be the fairest way. What are the consequences if we stay with the REU-based system? Are we just prolonging the inevitable? And I don't know the answer to that question. I mean,
The answer is you don't have to move to any rate structure. Again, their commonly acceptable rate structures are flat charge, ROU charge, and progressively by meter size. There's pros and cons to each one. In general, the overall industry thought is that progressive by meter size and charging for all units used is the most fair and equitable rate methodology. That doesn't mean the other ones are wrong, it just means, that's the thought, is that that's the most fair and equitable way.
And that is the crux of exactly what we're bringing to you, is that's what the recommendation is. We do have all of these options, but if we do choose another option or continuing with our other option, that doesn't mean everything's just been great, just keep it going, let's just roll with it the way it is. We still have to go back, we still have to do a rate analysis and make sure that we have good functioning numbers for what we're providing. You can't just say, well, we've been pretty good at 3,900, so we'll just keep it there. We can't, we still have to do analysis on that to see where we should be at with that.
Why do you look at me when you...
Oh, I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to.
I'm not shy about anything. My idea is, what we got worked, and if that's an option, why do we want to change it?
Exactly right.
Okay, so I'll just make a very general comment. You're correct. Overall, you are financially healthy, both water and wastewater. Are you doing it in the most fair and equitable way? We know that you have very low water and wastewater rates. So what's the other piece of this keeping you financially healthy? And it's your connection fees. So the answer is, when you charge $3,900 for a connection fee, and that's keeping you financially healthy overall, a big piece of it, how did you develop that $3,900? If I asked you guys that right now, what would your answer be?
The answer is, started out at $1,650. It was jumped up to $3,650 back in, I think, 2000, 2001. And $2,000 of that was supposed to be put away for taking care of the system and upgrades.
And how were those numbers developed?
Yes.
How did you go from $1,650 to $3,900?
I never did that. I mean, that was there when I came in, so.
Yeah.
I plead
That's
not
what-
guilty, but
That's really the bottom line of what Beth is saying. You're right, overall financially, it is working. You've got two pieces that are feeding that. You've got your regular user rates and your benefit charges. Are those two pieces being fairly charged? These are very low, these could be that, and so now you're here. But remember, anything you adjust, if you lower the benefit charges, what's going to happen to the other piece? Okay?
Well-
It doesn't make it wrong, it makes it, are we charging the most fair and equitable? And that's up to you guys to see what path you want to go down.
I would think that DPW knows how many gallons of water we pump a month. So they know what it cost us to run that system, and it's my understanding that you can't charge more for the usage of the water than what actual cost and upkeep is.
That's theoretically the goal.
Okay, so that, to me, would be fairly, well, for somebody else, fairly simple to look at how many gallons and how much you charge and how much it costs for the upkeep of that system.
Yeah. And you've done that with the
Okay.
study, right?
And how do we look?
Well, right now, you look overall financially healthy. That's why I keep wording it that way. But the other piece to that is
Is it fair and equitable on the water
connection
side?
fees. How did you determine those? Are those defendable? How did you determine them?
I'm assuming, in all fairness, whoever the engineer was when they put the water in is one that determined it. How they did it,
And so let's just say that is fair. Can we back into that number today? Let's just say you were asked that. How did we get the $3,900? Can you answer it yes or no? And if you can't, how can you back into that number today? Should that number be $5,000? Should that number be $2,500?
And that's why we have Dawn here, and that's what started this about 2 years ago, or more, actually, which is, no one could tell me, Brian remembers this conversation, it was like, nobody could tell me what the 3,900 was based on. And so, we need to understand how to can we back into that number if we're there, are we close or not, or does it need to be adjusted?
And I think we can. Here's my thought.
I love it.
We know what it costs for the upkeep for the sewer. We know how many millions of dollars we're putting into that. How many benefits do we need to sell at 3,900 to make that equitable? I'm not saying profitable, but equitable. And I don't believe we're selling enough benefits to really do that. Because I remember, I don't know how many benefits we're selling now, but I had a chart and we were doing 100 benefits a year. I don't think we're doing 100 benefits anymore. I don't know.
Oh, I don't think you were doing 100 back then, and I think we can get those numbers, but with Don saying with, you've got benefits and you've got user rates, and you level them out. I mean, how long can user rate, or the benefit fees are always somebody signing on with new construction. That's only going to last in a community for so long, and then you're really going to have to shift these, because you need that continuing revenue to support the system.
So keep in mind, right now, you're at a 5-year low on those benefit fees, all right? I just rattled off all those numbers. This past year, you had $100,000 in connection fees. Before that, it was $500. Before that, it was $350. Before that, it was $250. And you're also coming to a perfect storm, if you will. You're healthy, you've got cash on hand, but you've got several, I explained, capital projects coming up, and your wastewater treatment expenses are going up for a period of time, supposedly 5 years, but we'll see if there's other things behind that. So the point being, like Beth said, if you don't have that appropriately determined between user fees and connection fees, and you lose growth, which every township eventually does, every city eventually does, you could be in a position where you haven't set your rates appropriately because you've relied on your connection fees or your benefit fees.
Well,
Matt, go ahead.
on that though, connection fees are to be used for expansion and replacement of the system. The user fee is for, and let's talk water, how much water they use. And that has always been my belief, that you charge that rate based on what it actually costs you to do the system, not to generate excess funds.
And you're talking in theory, and that's, what you're saying is correct in theory. But you have to look and say, are we really separating those funds? Or are we using the connection fees for operation fees?
Well, we never were. I don't know.
You never had a rate analysis.
Huh?
You never had a rate analysis. We never had a rate analysis done.
Well, if it's all separated out in two different, you got water and you got connection fee in two different accounts, you know that you're not taking it out of that account to pay for the water usage.
It's never been, you've never had a rate analysis to determine if it's too high or too low. They've always been commingled in the same fund.
No, I'm not saying we had a rate analysis. What I'm saying is, what you're saying, if I'm understanding you, that you cannot use connection fee to support the usage.
No, great comment. I did not say you cannot do that. Almost all communities do that.
I thought it was illegal.
Not very often is the pots perfectly separated and never commingled and never used for other things. The way you avoid double charging your customers, so don't think that, okay, we're doing this wrong and we're double charging our customers. How you handle that is you use a certain amount of the connection fees. I happen to use like a 5-year low for you guys because that's the safest thing to do. I use that as an offset to your expenses. So what happens is when you get $500,000 in connection fees, that actually helps keep everybody's rates low in the end, because we use that as an offset. That has to be done. You can't just have this pot of money that you're not using consistent money as an offset. That can actually get you in trouble in rate setting. I do use a 5-year low for protection. So I don't want you to think that you're not doing it right and we're charging customers this connection fee and we're charging them for their usage and we're double dipping. You use that as an offset to your revenue requirements to keep the system as healthy as possible and have funds to be able to do the capital improvements in the future. That's the exact position you're in right now. You have healthy cash balances, and part of that is because you've had healthy connection fees. Now it's time you're going to use that. What does that do? That's going to keep everybody's rates low. If you had to do these capital projects and didn't have this cash on hand, rates would be, I would tell you today, you need to raise rates. So this type of system helps keep rates lower overall, but it doesn't mean you perfectly have a pot of money over here and you perfectly have a pot of money over here and you're not using it when you need it.
No, what I guess maybe I didn't explain myself or I screwed up along the way there, but connection fees were always separated. You didn't use connection fees, and let's say water, we'll talk water. You didn't use connection fees to pay for anything for water rates or reduce water rates or anything else. That was always separated, and when you had to put in a water tower, that's where that money came from. You bonded, but at least that's where those funds went toward. They did not go toward reducing usage fees. And the usage fees were always just to cover the cost of the water. Now, I thought that's the way they always did it.
That's a perfect theoretical way to describe the different fee
Okay.
charges. Whether that's actually happening is a different story.
And whether it's legal,
I can tell you it's not, because you have a lump sum balance.
Yes.
of Whatever the amount is,
Mm-hmm.
okay? You don't have two separate amounts, you have one amount.
We always had two separate. We always had two separate. We'd go back and dig the
You should have
audits
historical
out.
audits. I mean, that would be easy to find.
we do.
So here's what happens at the DPW. We do our billing. All the money comes in, we deposit it into your account. Total. We don't separate it out. It's one check for revenues that goes in. And we have supporting information that tells you exactly where we got that money.
Okay, so
A
a
check
benefit
money.
fee would be separated out where you got that money.
You don't- It's separated out on a balance sheet, but not by fund. So you have a bank account, then I immediately send you my invoice for the month, and you give me a check back from that lump sum. You don't separate it out and say only my O&M charges are paying the DPW's bills. But there's other costs, associated. What Dawn is doing is looking at your system from like a business standpoint and taking into consideration financial issues. I look at it as, hey, I got this bill from the electric company, I got this bill from a customer, I have to put this in the bank and pay this bill. That's how I do my thing. So when you look at revenues paying O&M expenses, revenues are paying O&M expenses, but there's way more other costs associated with your system than just our O&M. So
Is
So
this,
wait.
that is what she's
So,
doing in hers,
I think-
getting deeper in that.
And if you want to follow up with specific questions for them, great, do that. But I think Matt and Tracy had some questions too.
Yeah, I can make it quick, I think. How are we on, like, non-revenue water? Do we have any losses that aren't accounted for?
Yeah, all systems have unaccounted water. East Bay Township has a low percentage of unaccounted water.
What is that, if you don't mind me asking?
I knew that was gonna be your next question. Yeah, I was gonna say less than 10. Once you get about 18, that's when the state starts getting squirrely and saying, hey, you've got some problems, you need to figure out where your leaks are, or where your unaccounted unbilled water
Right.
is going. But overall, East Bay Township, when compared to others, is in pretty good shape as far as its unaccounted water.
Okay. What does AWWA say to that as far as percentage? I thought it was closer. Is it 15? Okay. Okay. That's all I've got.
Yeah, if you're
Okay.
less than 15%, you're a good system.
Okay.
You get above that, then
Yeah,
Everybody comes knocking on your door.
and a lot of that has to do with the age of your system. Overall, East Bay system is fairly new, which usually results in less unaccounted water.
Okay.
You get into older communities with older water mains, they have a lot higher unaccounted water.
Right.
Just because there's a lot more inherent leaks.
Okay.
In newer we have new meters, like the older meters, when your meters are 20 years old, you're losing it through inefficiency at the meter level.
Yeah, they lose accuracy over time. When do these, are they due to be replaced?
We just finished that.
Oh, really? Okay, all right. Like
15 years from now.
15?
maybe longer.
Is that how long the batteries last on them, or the
When we're all
warranties or
gone?
whatever?
Yeah, well, the batteries, I mean, we had two different kinds of metering systems, and the older ones, they died.
Okay,
But the other ones were still working. We were constantly getting complaints, or it wasn't reading right, or we missed the signal. It was
Okay.
falling off, dropping off the system. The new ones are working pretty good.
good, okay.
Tracy, did you have questions?
This is probably way different topic, but I know that we did the rate study at the DPW level for all municipalities that are involved. So in order to keep the Traverse City, Grand Traverse County all on equal playing fields, should not all the shouldn't this decision be at the DPW level?
Yeah.
So that all municipalities go either to meter and usage or RUs, and shouldn't we all be using?
That's a good-
In a perfect world, shouldn't
Yeah.
we all be using the same rate table?
That's a good question. There are 5 watered and sewered townships in Grand Traverse County that are part of the BPW.
No,
Oh, I haven't heard that in a long time, but yeah, right. So,
in there,
what?
Elmwood is in there,
Elmwood,
so they're not Grand Traverse County.
Elmwood, Peninsula, well, no, they're not Grand Traverse County, but it's the Traverse City area. Yep. Elmwood, Peninsula, Garfield, East Bay, and Acme. So each of us I would say from an operational standpoint, John probably hears that and is like, yeah, if everyone would do everything the same, that would be.
Really be easy.
That tomorrow.
Be much better, yeah. But we don't. We all do things differently. And that's not such a bad thing. There's a reason and a rationale for that. For example, our water system is different than, say, Garfield's. Garfield doesn't produce any water. They purchase all of their water from the city of Traverse City. And then they actually turn and sell their water to Long Lake Township now. So, and that's not even a direct sell from like Traverse City to Long Lake. So it's a little different every place. Acme, of course, just has sewer, but not water. We have, in my opinion, we're one of the luckiest because we have a standalone water and sewer system and are in control of that, though we are contractually involved with the county and the other 4 watered and sewered townships. But we do have that independent ability to make the decision for a rate structure.
If we don't like what they're doing, we could go off on our own.
Correct. And as a matter of fact, I don't think that all of the townships have fully implemented what they're planning on doing. I think we're in different stages. But so, for example, like Elmwood Township decided to go to a meter-based system for their connection fees. Garfield Township, I don't think has made that final determination. I think they decided to raise their rates.
Still on RUs.
And Peninsula Township, I think, had a significant rate adjustment there. We're in a different situation. We're not going to have a significant one. You saw ours are 3.5%, so it won't be significant. We do have a list of healthy capital improvements that we'll be doing. So we want to make sure we're staying there, and as we're doing that, it's a good time, if we have a healthy system, to now make choices for ourselves, rather than when we've spent all this down or something like that, and then, well, hey, we want to go to, meter size or this size. We'd rather just have it all mapped out. Think it would,
Well, and I know, I come to you almost every 6 months okay, Beth, where are we on these projects? Because I need to know.
How much cash are we gonna
Where I
need?
need the cash to be,
Right.
because, I don't want to be stuck with it invested someplace and I need it. And so,
Yep.
this is where I live a lot. Keeps me up some nights.
Yep.
The main reason why each individual township's doing their own thing is you have the authority for the rates. I can't set your rates for you.
Right,
But we can make recommendations. And again,
right,
I mean,
I
can give you a
understand.
recommendation, but I'm not an elected official. It's easy for me to just do the math and see how much needs to be, and I can't understand why you guys don't see that. But you're an elected official, and I understand, trust me, I understand. It's way more complicated than just dividing two numbers.
Well,
I guess I would like to know collectively from the board what direction they'd like to see us do some further analysis so we can implement that, whether that be meter-based or REU-based, so that then we can move down the track of that. Yeah.
I've been kind of quiet taking all of this in. Two things. The $2,000 that per each benefit set aside wasn't at the DPW level, it was at our level.
Yeah.
And I can remember for years Glenn saying, but has that money been moved yet? And it was $2,000 per benefit on the water side and on the sewer side of that 3,900. So I understand where you're coming from, but we weren't asking DPW to split that pot. That's what we were doing on this side, so you wouldn't see it. But that was because the Hoke Road project was supposed to have to come, was coming to fruition, and we were going to have to fund that, if I remember correctly. And of course, we all know that's really never going to happen. So do we even need to do that, set aside for that? Or can we, as a board, choose to change how that is done? It's not set aside for that, it's set aside for other capital projects.
Well, there is no policy on that, so,
right. We as a
know.
board did decide to not do that because that's not on our books, that has not
Right.
been happening.
But as I was hearing Glenn keep saying that, well, of course, John wouldn't have that at DPW side
Right.
because we didn't ask them to participate in that. That was
Right.
on our own side of
It
it,
was done by resolution or something by the board.
with the set aside.
And John doesn't break out the benefit fees
Right,
at all,
right. And
yeah.
he did clarify that they don't. But I guess I wanted to validate the comments that Glenn was making based on that part of it. And so I guess my second point was, if we're not collecting $3,900 for the capital, then yes, we should be adjusting the rates. But and should we be collecting the 39?
But if I can just say one thing here. You would ask the question, how did they come up with $1,650? That was based on what the cost for the bonds were annually when they put the system in. So that connection fee, REU fee, was always on what we were paying for the bonds, how much debt we were in, is what that was kept for. I thought about it while I was sitting here, it'd been a while.
Great comment, because that's usually what it's based on, but then you have to be careful, is that debt paid off, and did you lower it by $1,650 when it was? So, we want to be, that's usually what it's based on, but the problem is when we do base it on something like that, almost always the utility doesn't lower that when the debt's paid off.
And that's the point for the rate analysis.
So that it's not an ad valorem
Yes.
tax.
And as we're doing that, what methodology do you want to use to do that?
I'm not sure we're going to come to an answer tonight, but it's an amazing discussion.
Well, it is a lot of information, and I think that was a little bit from that meeting in June. It was like a lot of information. We got really into the weeds, and it was a little like, I think Brian said, we were probably all drinking a little bit from the fire hose with that one. And as you know, we've been doing a lot of other projects around the township too, so. But, with this timing coming up, and as we were looking at annually wanting to do that, reinstitute that 3.5% in January of next year, it's like, you know what, we need to wrap this up and we need to come to a decision on what methodology we want to use. So we can really have her go do her thing. And then, once we also know that, the other part that comes into play is, if you remember, the ordinances were redrafted, but they were held for one thing. He needs to put the methodology type in the ordinances, so that we can do that ordinance update, which will be great, because it'll just make them all more concise and consistent with current statute. Not that they're far off, but I'm just saying that we can get that finished too, so that's a component as well. I guess just, maybe we'll just kind of, Mindy, do you have your thoughts? This REU and meter size?
I'm comfortable with either, as long as there is a rate evaluation on the REUs to make sure that they're equitable there, just a reevaluation of what those are. I'm also comfortable with the changing to the meter size. I like that option. I do think that we're being completely fair right now with the water. The sewer, on the other hand, is a different issue because it's not based on actual usage. And using the water meter to determine how much the sewer is in the first place is a problem with anybody who's got an irrigation system, so.
Good answer. Before we go to Matt, let me just ask you guys to follow up. What are the methods that we deal with that?
So the method to deal with that is to do a winter-based average. So for example, you would look at a meter, but your billing system has to be able to do this, okay? You look at a meter, and I'm just making up numbers. Let's pretend in the winter months, it's usually an 8 to 4, winter, summer, 8 months to 4 months. We look at those winter months, and let's just pretend the winter months they're using 5, okay? Then we say, okay, in the summer, we're not gonna necessarily make June, July, August, September 5. We might bump that to 7. Okay, we're gonna have some sort of little bit of a leeway there. And then their water would be used what they use. Let's pretend they use 15 a month. Their water would be 15 because they used that, washing their car, watering their lawn, doing whatever they did. But the sewer would be capped, winter-based average, at, let's say, 7.
So
as an example.
is that across the system, or is that on the individual user basis? Because we've got a lot of snowbirds here.
Right,
So their winter is gonna be 0 or turned off, right?
Right, and so what you can then do is, in that situation, use a system average. What is, in general, what do we use as a system average? And let's pretend your system comes in at 2, let's just say. We know that the snowbirds are affecting that, because in general, that's really low. I mean, I'll be able to help guide you there. Good question. So there is a way to handle it. Now, another way which we do not recommend is you can have what's called a subtract meter. So let's pretend, we've got a regular domestic use meter, and then we have a meter that goes out to measure the sprinkling. But you gotta have a plumber, you gotta add another meter, your meter reader has to read 2 meters. But many communities do that. It's, in my opinion, not cost effective, but then it's used as a subtract meter. So in my example, through the domestic meter, let's say 15 got used, and I'm not an engineer, so help me out, but 15 got used, but we know 5 of it went to sprinkling. Okay, that would be a subtract meter. So water would be charged 15, wastewater would be charged 10 in that example, because we measured what went out to the sprinkling system. That is a methodology used, it's a common methodology used, but you have now the homeowner having to pay a plumber, add another meter. You guys have to replace 2 meters, you guys have to read 2 meters.
And there's backfill meters on it, every one of
Right,
them.
all that.
How have the courts looked at the averaging? Are they supportive of that methodology? Or,
So instead of averaging, well, for water usage, you could average, but this is kind of getting a little bit deep, but to get the appropriate cost recovery from the snowbird, it would be important to set that customer charge correctly. right? Right now, you charge effective $7.46 customer charge, that's super low. What that is supposed to recover in theory is the meter reading, customer service. I mean, you're not gonna fire a customer service rep or some administrative staff because somebody didn't use water. It recoups a portion of the distribution system. In general, it's between 30 and 50% of the distribution system. How do we determine that? It's called a minimum system analysis. If everybody only used 1 drop of water, what system would I have to build out? This is a theoretical discussion, not like a true engineering. What system would I have to build out? That's what I know what I have to build out. I could use all 5/8 inch main or small main, but because people use more than 1 drop of water, I have to use those transmission mains, 12 inch, 16 inch, whatever. So what's the difference between that system I would have had to build and the system I could have built at a minimum? That's the amount of the distribution cost recovery that rolls in that customer charge. That's getting way deep in the weeds. All you need to know is that customer charge is a very detailed analysis. I don't just sit at my computer and say, that should be about $15. There's 100 spreadsheets in my cost of service studies that go into and tell me what that charge should be.
She's not exaggerating. I've seen her Excel spreadsheet. She rocks at Excel.
But anyway, what you need to know is to have confidence in that, right? And so that customer charge at $7.50, it's not covering all that.
It's not covering the person coming to the meter to read it,
Exactly.
even if they're driving in their car.
And, okay, Matt, thoughts on the methodology?
Well, I still would like some answers from my questions from years ago, and I have more questions that I'd like to be able to come up with. I really do think we need to think about this a little longer. The REU chart is adjustable, correct?
By action of the board, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So if, the example you gave, they need to adjust that chart is what it amounts to. And part of the discussion a few years ago, or 18 months, whatever it was about the legal ramifications, and that's why we went into closed session with an attorney and to discuss, because there were lawsuits and everything else. And how did those turn out? I mean, where are we on that?
Well, just for clarification for everyone listening, those weren't lawsuits we were involved in.
No, I know that.
Yeah, okay. But I didn't want anybody to
that's why
misconstrue.
So, personally, I think I've heard it here before, the system seems to be working. I keep hearing everything that we're very low, with the exception of the $3,900 where we're being told that's high, but there's no study to prove that, or there's not been any information I've seen. And, our little thin packet here is about minutes from the past. I would like to see some numbers of where the comparison is, If you got a 1-inch main coming into your house, it's going to be this and this and this. With a meter, it's going to be this and this and this. With an RU system, it's this. So I can just look at the numbers and compare it. It's just a what-if chart, not what actually is. Because, I'm not on a water and sewer system, so I'm not familiar with how they're charged. But so I guess I struggle with making a decision tonight just based on what little bit we've given. Yeah, there's been a great discussion, but we need to talk about it. And it is a fairly big thing, if we lower our $3,900, and you're right, rates are going to have to go up to match it. What are those going to be? And have we had many complaints from the people that are using the system now?
Well, it depends what portion you're talking about. So from residents, commercial, industrial users on their monthly rates, no, I've never heard from them. On homeowners, builders who pay the REU fee, or I'm sorry, the benefit fees, yes.
But again, what percentage, you can say you've had some, but I don't know how many. And as far as the builders go, they're going to complain about every dollar. I don't know. I just remember the conversation, like I say, from 18 months ago, and we were all supposed to hand in questions. Those questions were supposed to come back to us with the answers, all of them. So I would see whoever else had questions, so then we could add to that conversation, and that didn't happen. But I really would think that we need to table this for another month at least and have some more information brought forward that gives us some solid, more visible numbers to look at to make the determination.
I think that's what Beth is asking, because then that's a totally separate scope of work that I would have to charge for, to do analysis on that type of analysis. Your scope of work for the cost of service study has been done for a long time. This is just more follow-up on what direction you want to go, if any, to change anything. I think that's what you're asking, right?
Yep, and we did have, you're right, you did have those questions entered. These were very general in nature, though. These were not like, numbers or, what will the rate be, that sort of thing. So I'm not sure anything in here wasn't mentioned already. I was scanning through those as we were asking them. Again, save the broader general legal arguments.
Was I the only one turning in questions?
No, Sue did as well. But again, hers were related to seeing specific file and like who would it affect. And so we want to stay away from putting anyone here in a position of knowing, this is the customer and this is how it would impact that customer. We can talk about general customers and demographics of them, but we wouldn't want to name specific customers.
Well, what I remember from the discussion before, too, is that it come to me as we would be, it's more, if you go to the meter-based size of the inlet line is more of a potential rate than the REU would be. In other words, so if you got a 5/8 or you've got a 1-inch, you get a different charge. Is that not correct? That's correct. Yeah. So, and the reason is because if you have a 1-inch line, the potential is you can use more water then, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
But also at the larger 1-inch, you have to have a larger meter, so it costs more at the front end. So it's that front end charge as well.
And actually, I think you grouped everything 1 inch and below together, did you not? Yeah.
But again, I'd like to see that, so.
Okay, Sue?
I guess my thought is, it makes sense to me to look at now, for 2025, the 3.5. But in doing that, we also need to look at that realistic benefit cost. Because if we're not doing that huge infrastructure, but we are doing other capital, that, to me, I think should go down. I go back and forth, because those of you that are on water and sewer paid those benefits. Those that are coming on later, if they're not paying them, is that fair? I don't know, but rates should be adjusted based on the usage. If it has to be looked at even at a half for an apartment, so that when those developments go in, they're looking at a half a benefit per unit. Maybe that's more realistic. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking all across the board, so I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. But like you say, if it's a one-bedroom efficiency and there's 10 of them to make a complex, should they truly be, or one-bedroom efficiency, should those actually be charged $3,900 for water, $3,900 for sewer, for all 10 of those, when you know that the use is not going to be that much of a hit to the infrastructure.
Do you see, are you valuing any merit to the meter-based connection fee?
I guess I'm leaning towards that. I
Okay.
think that maybe the size of the meter would be more appropriate, but then like John said, if there's 100 of those one-bedroom efficiencies, you're not going to have 100 meters. You're going to have one meter that will then be broken down by a manager to then bill each unit separately. So I don't know, Beth. I don't know that I'm
Okay.
ready to make that
No,
decision.
I get that. I hear what you're saying. Glenn? I know what Glenn's going to say. He wants to keep everything right as it is.
Okay.
No.
Number one, and you hit on it. What the big complaint is these apartment complexes are paying one benefit per unit. The problem that I see is they got 1 meter. So technically, their water is probably cheaper than having one benefit per unit. But they're billing whatever they bill their occupancy, and I think of a trailer park over in Garfield Township. That's got a big water meter, I'm assuming, and they got probably a couple hundred units. Well, they charge, I believe, just about what we charge per unit. Well, I gotta believe that their water usage, the gallons, they pay a lot less than what if they had individual. That's one aspect I see in this. Benefits, I don't know, I guess I got a problem with how you would adjust them. I understand what you're saying. The thing is, we need to know how far in debt we are with, and let's use water or sewer. And those benefits are supposed to pay for that debt, the debt load. Well, if, let's say the debt load goes down, can you reduce benefits today when yesterday the guy paid $3,900? And pretty soon when you're out of debt, you're going to have the expansion that normally you'd have to have money for that. But it's really hard for me to understand how you would do it other than charging a benefit fee, having that money set aside that pays the bonds, whatever else, and if you got to build other stuff out, that's what pays for it, the loans. I don't know how much money you should have setting aside, because you're going to hit the time when you're probably not going to have a lot of benefits. We're going to go through that streak up and down. Somebody has done this. I mean, just because I can't understand it fully, somebody has had to do this, and somebody's come up with some kind of a number for the size of the area, what you should have setting there, and then you got your debt load on top of it. So that's,
So real quick to that, one, a lot of utilities do charge based on debt, and I had said, but did you lower it when the debt goes down and all that? That's not typically what you base it on, it's just what a lot of communities do. All right, there's a difference between the real analysis and what communities do to stay cash flowing. In general, what we use to determine the connection fee charge is called the equity method. I look at how much equity each current customer has put in the system. You've got capital sitting out there, millions of dollars in infrastructure that you've paid for that's not depreciated. You've got cash balances sitting there that your current customers have created that equity in the system. So any new customer coming on the system, we try to say, all right, we're going to put everybody on the same equity basis. If you want to connect up to the water and wastewater system, and I'm just throwing out numbers, right now we have $2,500 equity per person that's already currently on the system, and if you want to connect up, you have to be on the same equity basis and you need to pay $2,500. So when you say somebody's done that somewhere to figure all this out, that's what we do. That's what my firm does. That's what I do. That's what we did for you, and you got that analysis last June, or excuse me, June of 2021. So this is a follow-up discussion to that, to say, where are we going from here? So I can tell you all those things. I know exactly what it should be. Your study needs to be updated by now, because, and especially if you change your methodology, rate methodology, that's a whole different analysis. But, so just to answer that, that's what I do, and there is an appropriate way to figure out what that connection fee should be.
Matt?
I mean, I guess I'm supportive of kind of keeping the RU methodology for now, for a couple of reasons. I guess, you know, kind of what I've heard tonight, it sounds like, from what I hear, the complaints relative to our rates that we've heard feedback on, regardless of this discussion, it sounds like without any rate increase, Mindy brought it up earlier, the cost of construction has gone up astronomically the past 4 years. I mean, the fact is, we're going to have to maintain and replace parts of this system. There has to be a rate increase. I mean, it would be you know, inappropriate not to address a rate increase. We know our costs have gone up, so you know that's coming. But you know, it sounds like a majority of the complaints have been coming in from developers, builders, you know, people that are being impacted by these connection fees, benefit fees. But, you know, to Glenn's point, I think it's a really good point. And I guess it kind of brings me to a question. Who, is it the DPW? Is it the township by our own ordinance or some other standard that determines how many units, let's say in an apartment complex, can be coupled into 1 meter, can be served off 1 meter? Is there a standard around that, or is that just brought in as the design firm that designs the apartment complex comes to DPW and says, here's what we want to do?
Well, that's what they do. The other aspect is the owner has to pay the bill. So the bill has to be a lien on the owner's property.
Right.
So if we're billing, and then there's legal ways you can get around that, but it has to be done in writing and stuff like that. Typically, the owner pays the bill if it's 1 meter. If they don't want to pay the bill and they want their individual units, then they have to put up a header system and we will meter each individual unit. So we have both in the system.
Right.
But the lead in is designed by their plumber or their architect or engineer, whatever.
Okay. You know, because I guess what I'm looking at here is, you know, and I'm on East Bay Water and Sewer, and I can certainly appreciate the affordable rates that we have, except during the summer when I'm running the irrigation. It's still cheap. But I guess my concern is, you know, we have developers that are building, you know, apartments and multifamily housing. They're complaining about these upfront costs because these eat into their cost to build. But they're not probably too concerned about the ongoing costs. So if we're going to shift, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent, I know the analysis needs to be done. We need to figure out what the costs are and what's equitable. But I guess from a philosophical standpoint, if we're proposing to shift those costs from an upfront cost to, say, a developer who's more concerned about that upfront cost, and shift those costs over to an ongoing monthly build cost, he's going to pass, he or she, whoever the developer is, or the owner of this complex, is going to pass all those costs onto their residents, regardless of what they are. They don't care at that point. You're not going to hear any complaints from the developer. Now you're going to hear complaints from the residents that are going to be stuck with the rate increases, theoretically, right? I don't know. I guess I look at it from the standpoint, you know, to Glenn's point that, and I don't know whether this is legal or not. I mean, I would imagine that if I'm operating an apartment complex and I've got you know, a property manager there, I'm going to charge a fee to administer that then. And, you know, where's the equity for each of those individual apartments that are on a combined meter that's serving 20 units off 1 meter? They're all just getting charged the same fee. You may have one person living in one apartment and 10 people living in the other one. They're using 10 times the amount of water in the other one, but they're all being charged the same amount. So, you know, when you look at it through that lens, that's not really equitable either.
Sometimes they are sub-metered. So the developer will put in meters.
Their own metering.
Yep.
Okay.
So, I mean, that is out there, but we have nothing to do with those meters.
So, I mean, kind of going, I said I support the REU methodology, but if we went down the meter size methodology, this gets the conversation gets a little more complicated, but, could there be a conversation around requiring multifamily to be individually metered in that case? So that for the residents that actually end up living there, that they're billed equitably through those individual meters. You're saying they,
Yeah, I mean, you're increasing the capital costs.
well, 6 of one, half a dozen other, right?
I think you can require it. I mean, I can just tell you what my recommendation is fewer leads and as few.
Sure, understood, yeah.
I'm just, because.
More maintenance, more places to
Yeah,
leak.
I mean, take Bayview, every building out there is 12 units, some are 24.
Right.
So now we have 150 meters that we have to maintain and read. Because once they're in, they're yours. You own them.
Right.
You have to repair and replace them. What we're trying to do is you have to look at, when you bill, who's your customer? When you bill an apartment complex with 12 units that has 1 meter, the individual units are not your customers. It's the management company that's your customer.
Understood, yeah.
So we want to bill him or her. We want to bill that unit the same as we bill any other unit, and hopefully those rates can get traced back to a single-family home and say the rates that we charge our customers are equitable amongst all classes or across all classes.
That makes sense, makes sense.
But I agree. I know of a customer in a mobile home park that they come over and complain to us all the time with their bill. And I'm like, we're not the ones billing you. And then they show me it, and they've been estimated for 18 months.
Right.
And you're like, whoa, you might want to go ask these questions. But they're not our customers.
No, I get that. I mean, there's a balance there, and obviously, the more infrastructure's out there, the more that the township has to own and maintain, and you have to deal with, and there's costs involved there. I'm just trying to illustrate we've had a lot of conversation about what's equitable, what's fair, who's using how much water, but when we're talking about the multifamily, which sounds like that's where the complaints are coming in from the developer side, we're not talking about what's happening behind the scenes after those fees have been assessed on the front end and those ongoing costs. We don't know. We don't have any, like you said, you sell the water, you bill the property manager, and you're done at that point. What they do after that, who knows? We don't know what's equitable, but those are still
But
residents
they
of the
have
township.
chosen to live there.
Yeah, they signed a contract to be there. But,
Right.
I mean, we do know what each of those units per your benefit chart. We know what each of those use on a daily basis of gallons of water. And so we're not, this is why I say we can't, I don't want to assign it gallons per day, but you can assign a proportion. So if you're quote unquote a half of a residential home or a single family home, well, let's see what our single family homes average, and our average should be half of that. If it's not, does it warrant an adjustment in rates? Is it, I mean, I would say that as a school, if you're being charged 50 and you should be charged 10, you're being charged too much. That chart needs to change. But again, it opens a can of worms. You have a couple, I'm gonna say like 80 or 90 different formulas to use, and one complains, and now you got 79 waiting in line, and and when does it stop? When do you say, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, because if not, you're looking at these every month. Every time somebody gets a bill, they're gonna complain. What we do is at the township's discretion, or I guess back in the day, it might have been ours, to say, hey, look, we're noticing different usage trends amongst this class. Taking a look at this, we think that this particular formula here is outdated. Here's a study that we did to show you that instead of a 1-to-1, maybe it should have been 3/4 to 1 or a 1/2 to 1. That's what we can do, and other townships have. So other townships have taken on apartments, mobile home parks, senior living, assisted living, like I said, office buildings, manufacturing. So all of those studies have been done for other townships. So the information's there. It's just a matter of, do you want to do it? There is a ramification to it, because you've been charging 1. If you're going to go to a half, if you sold 100 benefits, there's 50 times 3,900 that we won't be charging the next guy.
I think that
So-
the .5 doesn't work because you're not getting that, I forgot what term you used, but with the meter size, there's a term, there's a number, and then
Commodity
The co-
and fixed
Yeah.
charge,
The
customer
fixed
charge, and
charge.
commodity rate.
I think that the .5 gets, you're not getting any of that, you know, you're not paying for the person to drive by to read the meter if you're going down to a .5. That's why I think that the 1 is the lowest you can go.
Tracy, comments or questions on the methodology?
Well, I think I started out, the easy way for me would be just stay REUs, because that's what I'm used to. But when you talk about most equitable, because I've gotten all those phone calls about, you know, I'm one person and I'm paying the same as the neighbor next to me with 5 people. And so I would be more apt to say we need to look at the benefit fee. We need to go to meters and usage. But
Be more apt to, repeat that again for me, I didn't hear all of that.
go to
The-
meters and usage
Okay,
and look at the benefit fee.
okay. Well, so this is super interesting. We have like 7 people and well, you know, I've really listened a lot to John and to Dawn and to Brian, and I really think the meter fee, while it's probably more difficult to go through from our standpoint, not theirs, but from our standpoint, is harder. I think it's probably the appropriate way to go. I don't think that we're going incorrectly or wrong if we stay with the REU. It's just different. And if we do that, I do think that we need to take a look at that REU table on the residential side, because I do think that you can take a look and see, you know, how much are we allotting for a home, and does it make sense that a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment or a studio apartment, where are they at? And actually, that's hotels too, because right now, a hotel room is built at 1 residential equivalent of a house. I mean, they don't do, you know, the dishwasher, the you know, you're talking, what, people come and stay and they shower and flush a few times and then they're gone. Way different usage than like the home. So I think it would make sense to do an analysis of where that table, if that table needed to be adjusted. So I guess my preference would be to do the meters, but if we stay with the REUs, to do some further analysis on that table. But,
Can I make a comment on the table?
yeah,
Just so everybody understands exactly how this table is. You take a building of whatever use, and you put a meter here and meter all water that is used there. Then you come back and say, what's the easiest way that I can analyze all of these types of buildings and come back? Hotels is per unit, but they do laundry. They have, I mean,
Yeah.
there's other usage for the water
yep,
that is included in that unit charge.
yep.
I'm not saying one, I don't know, hotel room should be one.
I wasn't-
What I'm saying is,
yeah.
there's more to it than that. So in a school, there was a meter out front and it went all usage, drinking fountains, bathrooms, the cafeteria, all that stuff. And they came back and said, what's the easiest way for us to make a calculation? Can we go by room? Do we go by student? Do we go by teachers? So they developed that chart. So one of the worst ones that they all have, is doctors are per doctor in a building. And they move in and out every day, and you can't keep track of it. But if it was based on meter size, all of that goes away. There is no analysis of what you're doing inside of here. It's all looking back, and you say, you got a 1 inch, here's your cost. We can post it on the board. Everybody knows what it is coming in. Nowadays, we gotta call Brian to do some calculations for us, because they're complicated.
And when you go through and do that rate analysis, what you charge on that, you know, that 2-inch meter when it goes in, you can adjust when you're setting that rate, you can adjust those if you see your usage rate getting really high or expensive. Could you not, when you're first doing that? I mean, you kind of titrate those, correct?
So we're talking about the usage rate. A true cost of service study tells me what the customer charge should be and tells me what the commodity rate should be. Rarely do we perfectly charge cost of service. I have to tweak that to make sure we don't create rate shock. Now, what John was talking about, which was the connection fee, that's based on the equity method, a totally different study. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Again, I mean, I go back to the meter size. It just, counting the number of bar stools in a restaurant never made any sense to me, because you go in a month later, they have 5 more or they have 5 less, and that affects them a lot in what they end up paying. And I think that the methodology, the AWWA supports that methodology, but the truth is here in a board of 7, you know, we've got 2 that really want to stay with REU, 2 who would probably say, let's go take a look at the meters, 2 who could go either way, and 1 who's unsure. So I think that's a pretty big spread. If it were between 2 things and we were leaning one way, I would say, So I think given, you know, it's about 10 to 9, you know, I kind of hope to come to a decision tonight, but what I'd like to do is put this on the February or the March agenda, knowing that we have until January of next year to do that rate, and we can do that. But we have a little bit of time. We're not under the crunch. I'm not hearing, correct, Dawn?
No, not financially. Like we said, it's working. The
Yeah.
only question is it the way we want to be working?
So-
There's no emergency, you're financially healthy.
So what we could do is just each individually, between the next February meeting or the March meeting, just take an opportunity to, you know, read as much as we can. You know, MTA has out a tremendous amount. Other organizations do, like AWWA. And come back, and after reviewing Dawn's information, and we'll get this PowerPoint slide to you. It's pretty general, but that's good because it keeps us kind of a broad level. Maybe come back to the meeting and we'll kind of do a little bit of straw poll again and just see. You know, I as well wouldn't, if we do RUs, well, that's what we do. You know, it's not so much a hard and fast. I just see more merit in the meter. But go ahead, Mindy.
So some people, including me, are very numbers-based and want to see actual numbers. So if you would like to use my house and do it on my house, and me as the customer, I'm more than happy to allow that.
Okay.
I've got a,
I wouldn't say do the whole township, you know, just pick a handful or a number of places and see what the average is for a single family.
Oh, you're asking John to see can you do that, John?
For what the new rate?
No, they're just looking to what an average household generates.
Yeah, I already know that.
Yeah. Matt?
yeah, just, we were talking about going to the meters-based, potentially. Would that create, so your monthly billing, your commodity charge would be based on that meter size as well, right? 5/8, 1 inch, 1.5, right?
No.
So
Your commodity would be per gallon.
per gallon, okay. But you would have a fixed cost also that month
Yes.
associated with the meter size.
Is based on the size of your meter.
So if we go that route eventually, do you create turmoil amongst people who say, well, maybe I don't need a meter this big. I got 1.5 on my house. I don't use hardly any. Can I downsize to a 5/8? And now we're swapping out a bunch of meters.
That's a good point, and you need to have that decision made, because yes, they will
Yeah.
want a smaller meter.
And again, my recommendation is that you should go through that process because they're oversized their meter and it's not appropriate for the use that they see.
Yeah.
Having said that, if, 2,000 people come in and say, hey, we want a new meter, it's like, whoa, I don't have $800,000 to do that. You have to come up with some policy at the board level to say, either A, if you want a new meter, you have to pay for it, or B, we need to take a look at
And that's why.
replacement costs and see if there isn't something we can do within the budget.
That's why we grouped all the residential, what tends to be on residential, all together. That's why the 5/8 inch and the inch were all grouped together, because we don't want to start a huge drive in all of the residential that we have, which is considerable, to say, oh, I want a new meter, right? So really, we would leave it up to those larger entities that have the 2-inch, 3-inch main, whatever. If it means so much to them, then they would change that.
But those are the more expensive ones, too. A lot more expensive.
And Matt, you'll see in the presentation when you get it, that was one of my points.
Oh, okay.
On the RNU basis is, it encourages you oversize your system, right? Because there's no penalty to oversize. So, why would you take a 5/8 inch meter? I'd take a 1-inch meter on my house. It helps with flow or whatever. And so, that's one of the negatives to the RU basis is it encourages oversizing meters.
And, I mean,
So the flip side of what you just said.
we're not really, but the way the rates were developed, I think 1 inch is the minimum. So we're not gonna see single-family homes wanna downsize their meter unless they have greater than a 1-inch meter. Because those three are gonna be one, 5/8, 3/4, 1 inch is one.
Okay.
If not, then if 5/8 is the limit, we have a lot of homes on 1 inch. Their rates are gonna go up no matter what we do. And we wanna eliminate that as much as possible on the single-family home.
Okay, so I will, actually, I'm thinking of the agendas in February and March, and I can tell you February is chock full from Claire with Planning and Zoning and the Planning Commission. March, I had something on there as well, so this may be March or April, actually. And I will get with Dawn and check with her schedule and Brian and John as well, and then put it on one of those agendas. Okay? Sound reasonable to everybody? All right, with that, we'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment? Zach, you stayed with us till the end. Thank you. Any upcoming meetings? Just our regular meeting in February. And if there's no objections, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight.